and I have my life experiences, but I do have an innate ability to help people to learn because I like to learn. And I think that learning and coaching and mentoring is my thing. That's who I am.
Welcome to the Leadership Lens, a resource of the Indian Valley Chamber of Commerce and your gateway to regional business leaders' minds and stories. Join us for engaging interviews, fostering connections within our dynamic business community.
Welcome to the Leadership Lens podcast, sponsored by the Indian Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'm Ken Carfagno, the host, and I am so excited to welcome to the show the one and only, the Jedi Master himself, Ken Byler from Higher Ground Consulting, and now retired. Ken Byler and your bow tie, thank you so much for coming and just talking with me for a little bit here this morning.
It is my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
I usually start these with how we connected. So this was fun. You and I, first time that we met, do you remember?
I do.
Where was it?
We were at a chamber event. I can't remember. It might have been the new member session. I'm not exactly sure. I think that's what it was. Yeah.
It was. I was there looking for my ambassador. I found him. It was Scott Little.
Uh-huh.
And Scott said, "Hey, welcome to the chamber. Da-da-da. Here's this. Hey, here's Ken Byler. Meet him." You were right next to Mark. And then you and I got talking. And I immediately thought, well, his name is Ken, so he's definitely got to be cool. And you thought the same thing about me. I know it.
Absolutely.
So Ken B, Ken C, B's before C. So he has greater priority just by one letter.
Yeah.
And I knew that, but talking to you really briefly, I knew that you were somebody. It wasn't even in my wheelhouse to think I need to go get breakfast. Like that's not my thing as an introvert. But I just felt a connection with you right away. And I wanted to go get breakfast with you. I think you even offered, "Hey, let's get together at the cafe."
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first memory. Is that something that people say about you often? They just connect with you quickly?
Well, I would say I make an effort to do it that way. I'm like you, I'm more introverted than extroverted. I may not be as strong an introvert as you, but I'm definitely on the introverted scale. And I found that for me to survive and thrive in networking environments, I need to be intentional about finding one person to
Mm.
talk to. And so typically I start with somebody I know because that makes for an easy conversation, gets the juices flowing, sort of opens up my world a little bit to the world of extroverts because there's usually a lot of extroverts at those things. And then basically I'm always looking for somebody that I don't know.
Mm.
And my point from things I've learned about networking is that I make it about the other person. And so when I meet the person, usually one of my first questions is, why are you here and how can I help?
Mm.
And I get them talking about themselves, and I just keep asking questions and being curious about who they are, because that is how I prefer to relate to new people.
Mhm.
It gives me a chance to figure out if there's somebody that I can help, like to connect with other people in the chamber who might need their services or might benefit from their friendship. And then I also, obviously, when I had my business yet, I was looking at it as an opportunity too. Is this a potential client, somebody that I could actually work with? The only way to figure that out is to ask lots of questions because you really won't know
Right.
how the fit is going to be until you try that. And so that's what I typically do. And then after I know somebody, if I'm meeting them for the second or third or fourth time, I tend to use the same technique. I like to ask lots of questions, and I tend to listen more from a comprehensive and discerning perspective, and try to be really good and intentional about figuring out, how to make sense of what they're saying to me, and then being curious about things that puzzle me or that intrigue me. And yeah, that's just been my technique all along. And I learned that early on in my career when I was first learning how to be effective in networking environments.
Are you looking for a certain curiosity back also when you're talking to somebody? if you're asking questions, certainly if it's all one word answers like yes or hi or yes, my name is Ken, but
Yeah.
it's more in depth. They give answers. They're talking about themselves. Are you looking for the ones that have questions back to you? And they're like, you can tell they're more of a coachable person. Like, tell me about that. You can recognize that.
Yeah. So first of all, I usually ask a lot of open-ended questions. I might start with a few what I call confirmation questions, yes or no answer kind of things. But once I start asking things about the person and or their business, or if they're not a business owner, about their role or their job or their family or whatever it is, I'm usually asking open-ended questions with the intention of learning more. And then if my questions pique their interest about something, I'll only talk about myself and my work if I feel like it is important to them in the moment.
Mm,
So I'm not typically, especially in a network environment, I'm not there to sell myself right away. I'm there to present a friendly face, somebody that they can recognize and remember the next time they come to an event. And that happens a lot. People will seek me out the second time because I was welcoming the first time. And so, and then if I have a chance to introduce them to somebody, like if one of their questions is something that I don't do, but I know somebody in the chamber who does, I'll just walk them to the table or I'll walk them to that person wherever they're standing in the room if they're there, and introduce them and help them to make that connection too.
have you read The Go-Giver? I know you have.
I have, and Bob Berg and I actually have interacted a few times. Uh, he was he was very active on Twitter when
Mm,
I was still on Twitter before it became X. And I eventually abandoned Twitter and Facebook both from a business perspective because I just found them to be too full of stuff that I wasn't interested in. But Bob Berg and I often had really interesting chats on Twitter about things. And I was a big fan of his and still am.
mm.
And unfortunately, my library had to get smaller when I moved out of my office. And so his book ended up going to a business colleague of mine who got a lot of my books.
Yeah.
Well, you know Leslie Wheeling. She got a lot of my books because I wanted to pay it forward so she would have a chance to learn from some of the masters that I've learned from. I don't know if she'll have time to read all of the books that she got, but most of them are in mint condition. And Bob is one guy that,
Mm,
in that book, he makes the point. It's all about how you give to other people, and that at the end of the day, you get rewards, but I don't do it for the reward. I do it because
mhm.
it's the right thing to do. I do it because I enjoy doing it that way. That's just how I'm wired. That's my preferred way to handle it. And I do
I
that in every environment, faith community, um, business community, even in my personal life. I'm much more likely, even with a group of friends, to be sitting there listening or engaging somebody one-on-one than I will be, the main topic of conversation.
I think I found why and how we've connected because that was a very important book to me, and I'm wired very similar. I'm always looking for where the give is, and I came into the chamber with the same mindset. And if I go back to one of our previous episodes of the Leadership Lens, Stephen Hunsberger, we talked about what makes a good chamber member and what is maybe a less desirable chamber member. And this mindset of the go-giver is really what he was explaining. This is what we want in this chamber. And I think I was attracted to because I saw that in you right away. And what you were saying about asking questions, your second, third, fourth meeting, our second meeting was that at that breakfast. This is where I walked away thinking like he just did this Jedi, you will let me pass through. Like you did this Jedi mind trick on me. Cause usually I can do that to people. I can talk to them, I can ask them the questions, I can get them to share most. But I could not do that with you. You were so skilled. You were such a master of your art and science that I talked about me. I'm like, I feel so bad, Ken. I barely asked you anything. And that I walked away from that meeting thinking, this man is a giver, this man is a master, and this guy knows how to move a business forward in this, especially in this region. And the walk away from that is, and this is a question I had for later, but I'm gonna ask it now. I did a whole podcast on one sentence you said to me, and I'm gonna have you share a little bit more about where you learned this skill, this mindset. Maybe it comes from the go-giver, but you said Ken, because I said, all right, Ken, this is Ken B. I'm new in the chamber. Surely, yeah, of course, I would like to get some customers, some new commercial cleaning customers as a result of this, but that's not my primary goal here. My goal here is to connect and be a difference maker in this community. What do I do? And you told me some things, and then you said get a name for doing. Can you just talk about that? Like, how did you figure that out and do it yourself before you gave me that advice years later?
Well, I think I have been very fortunate in my business career to have worked for some entrepreneurs and business leaders like that who shared a lot. So, for example, my very first business that I worked in was a family-owned hardware and building supply company. I kind of liken it to a Shelley's in your community there in Satterton. It wasn't like a Lowe's, that kind of thing, but we had multiple divisions, manufacturing, construction, big retail. The owner, Carl Westover, was like that. He literally, he saw something in me that I didn't see, and he took me off the construction crews and brought me in to be his assistant.
Mm,
And he was one of my first mentors, significant business mentors, and he literally was incredibly generous. I could drive his Jeep, for example, to business meetings that he wasn't able to attend. He would give me his Jeep to drive. He didn't want me to put miles on my car.
How old were you? Early
I
20s?
was I was in my early 20s, yeah.
Okay,
And
okay.
he knew my parents and but he didn't know a whole lot about me. He was learning about me. But yeah, that kind of thing. Or he would often take me to lunch or invite me to, he had a Bible study that he went to. He invited me to go along because he wanted me to learn from him. And I watched him do, and he was an extrovert. Okay.
Mm,
So he was a master at conversation and making people feel comfortable. And I discovered that he also was the kind of person, even though he was extroverted, who didn't talk a lot about himself. So that's an example. I learned from people like that. But when I came to the chamber and started getting active in the chamber, I was there first representing Detweiler Hershey, who I worked for as marketing director. So I didn't have my business yet, but I started going to chamber events, and I soon realized that even if I was going to benefit Detweiler Hershey and the sales and marketing role that I had with them, I needed to do things differently because in a networking event, I know there are people who show up there with business cards and hope to sell themselves. And I never saw it that way. I saw the networking events. First of all, the influencers that I needed to talk to weren't in the room because they didn't come.
oh, that's
Literally,
good.
isn't that true? You don't see the presidents of organizations most of the time at those events. You might see some small entrepreneurs like you and I there, but mostly, I mean, you're not going to see the Clemens Food Group president or CEO there. You're just not, unless it's a big award ceremony or something. And so I discovered, well, the people that I really need to talk to, the influencers that are going to make decisions about accounting services or bookkeeping service, they're not here. So it's a kind of a waste of time for me to try to sell. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to build relationships and learn from them, whether or not they have connections. Can I use them as a coach to help me get to the influencer? Like, do they have any influence with the owner? So that was one strategy. And then the other was that I couldn't really show off who I was and what I could do for people in that environment because you're only talking to a handful of people at an event like that. If you're sitting down for lunch, maybe you have a table full of people. So I decided, well, the chamber needs volunteers, so where could I plug in? So the first thing I did is plugged into, they had a marketing committee and they had an expo committee. And I plugged into those two things and spent a lot of time going to meetings and found that in those environments, I could showcase the way I thought about things, the way I saw problems, the way my perspective about how to be effective with marketing and selling something or making something better. And I contributed a lot of really good ideas to improving those events and actually gained a reputation as somebody who was a really good committee member and who could mentor other people, and I had lots of connections in the community. And so all those kind of things sort of solidified for me that that was the way to do it. And so typically with all the chambers I was part of, and I was a member for a while in 3 of them, that was what I would do. I would join a committee and make sure that I was part of that because
Wow.
I could tangibly give back, and it was worth the investment because I got to know people really, really well. I got some business out of that because people realized, oh, this guy knows this person, or this guy knows how to do this really well. I can recommend him to somebody. And that wouldn't have happened if I had just been going to networking events, because you see a lot of the same people at those events. And typically, in my case, they weren't the people that I needed to talk to. So that it was almost like a strategy that happened because it was a necessity to do it that way. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be successful.
Did you, I imagine you sit down with other new members. I wasn't the first or the last. Do you tell all of them the same advice that you told me?
Yeah,
Do,
absolutely.
do you
Uh-huh.
notice they all, like, I heard it, I believed it, I did it. Do other people also?
So, some of them did, and some of them didn't. Yeah, there would be a few. I can think of a few for sure that really made a difference. And I'll be honest with you, I gained some really good friends from doing that. So I remember Bill Schwalze, who used to own Sinorama in Lansdale. He tragically passed away with
Oh,
cancer. But Bill and I and his wife Mary, we became really good friends because Bill and I were on committees together. And that was how I got to know him. And he was a fun guy, and we always had a lot of interesting conversations. And I learned to know his wife. But then they became a vendor of mine because I would go to him with needs for signs and stuff like that. And I would refer people to him all the time. And he did likewise. And so that's what happens when you're sitting next to somebody in a committee meeting, actually doing heavy lifting on
mm,
behalf of the chamber and making a difference, and people seeing that you can make a difference. Then you have more credibility when you do
it-
decide to actually present something to them as an option. Like, would you ever need this from me? Or could you refer me to somebody else? Well, now they know exactly who you are and the kind of person that they're recommending to somebody, rather than just a business card name and maybe a brief summary of what you do.
it's an amazing model and strategy. It reminds me of even like a church small group model where you get this big church. Like I've mostly gone to large churches, and how do you get to know everybody? And that was my feeling of the chamber. Like, Ken, it's huge. The Indian Valley is big. What do I do here? Because Steven told me, he said, you be the only cleaner. I'm like, okay, so I should probably meet some people, but they're all over the place. And I don't know if I'm going to do every event. Like, it's just overwhelming.
Yeah.
And you simplified it, and you remove the overwhelm, which is another master technique of yours. And you just said to me, Ken, don't look at the chamber and see it so big,
Hmm.
make it small. And that's when this conversation came.
Yeah.
And this is exactly, like, it's so cool, the full circle, because I met you at my membership orientation. And now pretty much every year with the membership, maximize your membership, Stephen has me come and share, and I just share our breakfast. That's all I
Hmm.
talk about. And so there's such a cool legacy piece there for you. Every year that I go and share my conversation with Ken Byler, what he told me, and I'll say the Jedi Master, and people say, "Oh, we love Ken Byler." Like, that's just the feeling that I get. So how does that feel to you when you know that I'm doing that, carrying that on year to year?
That's been my whole premise since I started this business. I have always felt like my legacy is teaching other people how to do some of the things that I do that I think have made me effective.
I'm gonna go back to something you said in the legacy piece when you're going through that. And that was actually my last question of the interview. That was like the big takeaway, and you hammered that within the first 20 minutes. So, I mean, interview over. Let's move. I'm gonna go back in there. One thing you said, it was actually one of my other questions, and you were referring to a lack of confidence and an insecurity in leaders. And I was reading your about section on LinkedIn, and you write, one of your goals is to replace insecurity with confidence. And I definitely related to that. I really did because I have felt insecure as a leader. I didn't want to accept the mantle of even that word of leadership upon me, but I knew I was supposed to. I knew I needed to grow. So I connected with that. So I'm curious, like what have you seen? What do you see across the leadership landscape, whether it's corporate, small business, for you to even make that statement? My goal is insecure to confident.
Mhm. So I actually think that a certain level of insecurity is important for every leader at every stage.
Oh,
So even when I get up now to speak to a group, or I'm preparing to facilitate a training session or whatever it might be, there's always a little anxiety that accompanies that preparation because you're putting yourself out there. You're being vulnerable. If you're doing it well, you're being vulnerable and honest about who you are as a person. That's been my approach. Like I talk about the things that I don't do well as a leader, as well as the things that I'm accomplished at, because there are lessons for people to learn from. So I'm not always the best listener, even though I teach listening classes. And I share the times when listening is hard for me and what makes it hard and how I have tackled that and what I've tried to do. So I'm willing to do that. So I would argue that you need to have a certain amount of insecurity to even be successful as a more confident and accomplished leader. But the reason why insecurity is important is because people need to realize that I don't want you to focus on what you don't have. And I don't want you to focus on your weaknesses, which a lot of people do because that's what the the corporate world often does with
that's our
their
culture.
evaluation.
Our
Yeah,
parents
well,
teach us
and
that too.
the evaluation process kind of does that. You have to say things that the person needs to grow in. I'm not a big proponent of that. I think you need to recognize those things and how they might hold you back. But I want people to be insecure enough that they say, well, I don't want to stay like this. I want to grow. What do I have to do to grow? And then when they get to that point, it's almost like somebody who's addicted needs to get to the lowest point where they say out loud, I'm addicted before they can be helped. Okay, well, leaders need to recognize, hey, I have a vulnerability issue here, or I am feeling insecure, and I want to change that. What do I need to do to change that? Those people are the ones who are the easiest to coach and to mentor and to help to grow because they're open to ideas. And then what I do is I introduce them to their strengths and their personality and show them how those two things help to shape who they are and how they can use that to their advantage. And so even though I'm a CD style on the personality profile for DISC, which is on the screen behind me here, I know that when I'm in a room full of people, that if I behave like a CD style, I won't resonate with the people the way I need to because I'll come across as being cold, indifferent, cynical, skeptical, whatever. And that's not what I want. So I translate that into being more like a D or an I, where you're more outgoing, big picture focused, have some energy. And that takes a lot of work and practice to do it, but it's worth it. Now, if I can teach other leaders how to do that, I don't live there, but if I can teach them how to do it and they get comfortable with that, regardless. Now, they might be the outgoing person and need to shut up now and then too. And I like to show people how to do that too. There have been times when I've seen people who are too over the top in sharing, and it's time for me to say, whoa, hang on. You don't have to be the center of attention all the time. You'd be better off listening sometimes. Like be the last person to speak instead of the first person. See what that looks like. So those are all examples of what I'm talking about. But you have to go back to that innate ability to be vulnerable and to let people know that at the heart of all of us, there's a certain amount of insecurity. And let's just acknowledge that and use it.
Mm.
I learn from it and use it to our advantage.
My takeaways from lead was simple. It was the self-awareness. It was the no nonsense. It was the assessments. It was seeing who I was and going from insecurity. That's why I related to this insecurity to more confidence because I didn't have to become a different person. Just like
Right.
you said in this interview,
Right.
I felt more confident because I was created exactly the way that I was supposed to be made. And there's ingredients that are under the surface that I need to hone better than I currently was. And what are those things? And maybe I'm over here trying this. That's not the way I'm designed to function. And so that's what this did for me. So I know over the course of these cohorts, you've had a lot of lead projects you've seen them implemented. Ironically, or not ironically, this right now that we're doing is my lead
Yeah,
project.
I
I
know.
decided I want to do a podcast. I like
Yeah.
podcasting. I like interviewing. This is my project.
Mhm.
So, of all the cohorts that you've done, just not like what you said earlier about the library, not going to one specific one and pulling out a book, but just the overall body of work,
Mhm.
legacy wise. And when you look back over those 8 years, just draw some lessons, conclusions, takeaways.
When we talked about doing something here, my goal was that from what I know about leadership and leadership training, what sticks is when people can apply it. So when I'm working with an intact team in an organization, or I'm bringing a bunch of supervisors or managers together from an organization, I know that what I teach them, they're going to have homework assignment every week. And they're going to go back and they're going to work on that stuff, and they're going to come back in 2 weeks or whatever the time frame is. We're going to talk about that homework, what worked, what didn't. We're going to continue to encourage them to apply what they're learning. So we wanted that component, and so we came up with the idea of the company project. All right, now here's the legacy. As I think back over all the cohorts and I think about all the stuff that's happened, I can think of quite a few organizations that have benefited from incredibly well-prepared orientation and training manuals for new
Mm,
hires or for new positions. A
mhm.
lot of folks have done that over the years.
Wow.
There's been some significant process improvement projects where local financial organizations or uh, you know businesses changed internal processes based on the project idea that actually enhanced productivity or cut down on mistakes or made a big difference in terms of how the customers felt about the experience, that kind of thing. There were some projects that were significant in terms of saving the organization money or making the organization money. And I'm talking significant dollars. I think the one project was $500,000
Wow.
in cost savings
Wow.
over a period of time. Yeah. Safety. A number of organizations worked on safety stuff, which was, I always feel like that's a great legacy thing to think about. And there were quite a few also that did things around marketing and or more effective promotion of their products and services. And so there's got to be, some benefit from having that in place too, because better visibility in the community, brand awareness, whatever, is going to benefit people down the road. So that's just a little taste. But the thing that I have noticed the most is how the people who've gone through this program, where they are now in their career trajectory in those organizations.
Mm,
Okay. And I keep an eye on that because I'm on LinkedIn. I don't always see all the people because they're not all on LinkedIn, but
mm.
I know people who have advanced in their career partly because of their lead experience and how it gave them new confidence and energy to do things, and how their project gained them visibility in the organization so
Oh
that
yeah,
they
I
had
bet.
more credibility for moving forward. So that kind of thing has been a really good positive as well. And then I know some people in the class who are now lifelong friends because they got to know each other in lead and they would not have connected otherwise, but love to get together and still enjoy each other's company and have friendships outside of class, which I think is great too. Those are all things that I value because I want leaders to have a life. you know there's more to life than work. And when you are a leader, like, yeah, I see myself as a leader in the business community and the business that I owned. I see myself as a leader in my family, and I see myself as a leader in my faith community and in my community. I mean, you wear all these different leadership hats, but at the end of the day, I'm a person with feelings, and I get tired too, and I get frustrated too, and all those kind of things. And I, I want people to experience all that. I want them to have work-life balance. I want them to know that, hey, if you're like me, your work can become your God, and it can get in the way of everything
Yeah.
else, and you have to be really careful about that.
That's
So
good.
those are some of the things that I would reflect on.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why the LEAD program has been well received by the business community, is because they see a return on their investment. I think there would be value in some of the smaller business people doing this, especially if you're fairly new in your business. So that would be for sure. The other people that I would recommend is, don't look just for the folks in your organization who are the obvious outliers, like the people who are already excelling in many ways because they're extroverts, or they're already really confident in their roles, or they have a lot of great training or whatever. Don't just single those folks out. Look for the people that are also outliers, but on the other side of the equation. People who are quieter, more thoughtful, who are good with people, who are good with processes, because they will benefit too. And in many respects, they benefit more
Wow.
because they often feel like their voice isn't valued in the business world, because the D's and the I's get all the credit for stuff because they're the vocal ones. And I'm here to say that if you have introverted leaders on your team, you have a hidden gem there that you need to bring out of the dark and polish up so that it can shine, because this year's class is a great example of that. We had well over 60%
Mhm.
of the class was C's and S's,
Oh yeah.
well over 60. And Ken, from the conversations, when we would put people in one-on-one conversations or small groups, how much they learned from each other, how they opened up, how they shared, and how well they did, all of them, with their presentations,
Mhm.
standing up in front of peers, which is not an easy thing to do. And it was a big group, way bigger than most years. 28 people versus 20 usually is what it was. So can you imagine that? And to me, and having some of them share, some of those same people like yourself share at the graduation, meant a lot to me, because it was validation that my thought process is right. That people who are more introverted and more quiet are often the persons who have the most to offer long term for the healthy organization, because they have the best grasp of what's going on. If they're S's, they have the best grasp of the culture and how the culture is feeling about things and how people are feeling, customers and otherwise. And if they're C's, they have a really great grasp of what's working and what's not, and the processes behind things, and how to problem solve and fix things.
Mm.
Why wouldn't you want those people to be in leadership roles where they have a chance to shine?
Mm.
And their leadership approach, if it's honed properly, can be really effective, because there's plenty of statistics now that
Mm.
show that those folks that are on the bottom half of the disc map, the C's and the S's, that combination of humble leadership, which is what that combination creates, is by far the most valuable leadership in any setting,
Mm.
political, business, not for profit,
Mm.
by far the most effective. So why wouldn't you capitalize on that? So that's who you need to look for, folks.
Wow. As we wrap up here, I want to congratulate you for winning the Indian Valley Chamber's Lifetime Achievement Award. You followed up with Doug Clemens, who's actually our next guest
Yeah.
on this podcast. Just reflect a bit on what that meant to you to be on that podium and sharing with your peers.
Well, it was probably one of the most humbling experiences I've had. I guess I felt really great. I was tempted, but I chose not to, because I thought it was self-serving. I was tempted to say from the podium, I would like everybody in this room who's had any interaction with me in a classroom setting or a coaching session or a networking event where I, you know, gave you some time, to stand up, because I know I know who was in the room, and it would have been the majority of people there. There would have been a handful that I hadn't interacted with. And I guess I felt the best about that, because when I came to the event, my wife was along with me, and she doesn't typically like chamber events, because she always says, "Hey, you know everybody. I don't know anybody." People people sought her out too, because they wanted her to know that that I have really made an impact on people's lives, and they wanted her to feel welcomed and affirmed for that too. And that's why I called her out in my speech, because she's been an integral part of who I am as a person and who I am as a leader and a husband and a father. So yeah, I wanted that, but I reflected on that a lot when I was standing up there, and as I looked out over the audience, there were so many people in that room that I personally know and have had influence on. And to me, that is what I was setting out to do when I started the business. I wanted to make a difference, one person at a time, so that if I create all these really effective leaders in these organizations, then they're going to be better managers and supervisors, which means that the folks that they supervise and work with are going to be happier and more contented and satisfied, which means their families are going to feel better about their work, and all it ripples down into all these places. And so, that's one of the reasons I like to do this. I had a coaching contract with a bunch of accounting firms around the country, and everyone I coached, there were 25 people in my cohort. I only met with them twice, but they were all partners. And I thought about, I'm here I am I'm only going to spend a brief amount of time with them, but if I get these people to focus on the goal they've set for themselves and they really understand how to achieve it, I'm going to have a huge impact on every one of those firms and their offices that they're in charge of. Think about that.
Hmm.
That's what blows my mind when I consider this, because I'm just this country guy from a little town in central Pennsylvania that does not have a bachelor's degree. I have an associate's degree in business administration. That's it. And I have my life experiences, but I do have an innate ability to help people to learn, because I like to learn. And I think that learning and coaching and mentoring is my thing. That's who I am. And that's how I've made my impression and difference. And I have my new desk set up, but I have an extension to put on it yet. I needed to get my wife's permission to add the extension because she wasn't home when I put the desk together. And I'm going to put the award right there where I can see it every day as a reminder that I have had an impact on these people. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that. It's humbling, but at the same time very satisfying. And it's one of the reasons why I can retire, knowing that whatever's next for me, that the first chapter that I had was really, really good. And now the next chapter can be whatever. It doesn't have to be half as good, and I'll still feel like I had a good life.
Well, you definitely can count me as one of those friends, lifelong friends. You've been not only just a friend, but a mentor, a Jedi master. You've been a coach. You've been so easy to just access and ask questions, and you're very likable. And it's been a thrill to get to go through lead in your final year. I've been looking forward to this interview for quite a while. And you kept saying that I'm a good interviewer. So I'm like, oh boy, this is Ken. This is the master. I hope I can live up to the billing he's already given me. I just want to say thank you. You've left an impact on me for sure, and I really appreciate you. And thanks for taking some time today to talk to the Indian Valley maybe one more time.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks a lot for everything, Ken. Appreciate it.
Keep listening and may curiosity guide you.